that you are still with us. I want to thank Henry Ford Village for being our sponsor for this session, and especially Teresa Port. Is Teresa with us right now?
Hello.
Hi Teresa, thank you very much, and to being our sponsor. Very excited to introduce our speaker today. This is Russell James, who is JD, PhD, and CFP. Has lots and lots of great credentials, has a YouTube channel, has books available on Amazon, and in his spare time, he is a professor in the Department of Personal Financial Planning at Texas Tech University. He directs the on-campus and online graduate program in charitable financial planning. And he is in demand throughout the United States and even into Alaska. He's going there next week to talk about plan giving. We are very fortunate to have him with us today, so I'm going to turn it over to him to maximize his time with us. Thank you, Dr. Russell, Dr. James, for the work.
Thanks so much. Well, I'm looking forward to sharing some results from research and some very practical results as well. And as a professor, it's really important to me, when I have a class, I only want to have the smartest students. So I worked out with the conference organizers that I want to have this really complex maze task, and only people who can successfully navigate that and find this really obscure location should be in the room so that we have a high level of intellectual capacity in the room. So I'm glad that they were willing to accommodate my desires on that. So here's the basic problem that we have. Very practical problem before we jump into some theory is that on the one hand, for example, charities often seek to get estate giving information. We want to know who's already included us. We want to know who's thinking about it, who could we be helpful to. But oftentimes they're quite disappointed with the lack of response. And we'll talk about some of the reasons behind that. Typically what I see with the standard response card of I've already included a gift in my will, or please contact me, is about 1 out of 1,000. If you're doing much better than that, please let me know. I'd be interested in that. On the other hand, it's also the case that charities often seek to give estate giving information and plan giving information. And so we offer that, but in many cases we're disappointed with the lack of attendance or lack of response. So this leads to the fundamental question, what's the deal? What's the problem? Why won't people talk to us? Why won't they listen to us when we want to talk about plan giving? Here's the problem. Regardless of how cute we get with the terminology, gifts that mature and things like that, we're actually talking about death. The things that we talk about are a strong reminder of the reality of a person's own mortality. Now, believe it or not, there's actually an entire field of experimental research that's focused on this question of what happens to people, how does it change their values and preferences when you remind them that they're going to die. It's a whole field of psychology called terror management theory. And so we know a lot about that field, and we know a lot about the results. And I'll tell you, at the first stage defense to reminders of our own mortality is avoidance. So avoidance can actually be expressed in a lot of different ways. People can express avoidance through distraction. Oh yeah, that estate planning thing, I'm too busy to think about that right now. Or differentiation, yeah, that doesn't really apply to me. Or maybe denial, those worries are overstated. Or delay. I definitely plan to think about that later. Or depart. I'm simply going to stay away from that reminder. Now, this is what the academic research and theory says. I'm sure those of you who work in charitable estate planning have never encountered any of these things from clients, but the theory says that you should occasionally encounter this from people. Another form of avoidance, by the way, that you may have encountered is actually the use of humor because if I make a joke, then we're not seriously talking about planning for my mortality anymore. So how do we deal with this issue? Now, look, I will tell you that I was an estate planning attorney in practice for about 6 years, and I gave lots of seminars on estate planning. And to tell you the truth, it doesn't really bother me to give a seminar on estate planning, because when I give a seminar on estate planning, I'm talking about your death. Not that big of a problem for me. But to actually attend a seminar on estate planning, ooh, wow. You've got to be thinking about your own death, unless it's in a professional context where we're just learning techniques and such. So what's the solution? If we recognize that death is subconsciously aversive, and the topics we want to talk about are subconsciously aversive, I want to suggest that a variety of very successful techniques in communicating plan giving information all use a variety or some version of this approach. I call it communicating obliquely. It's the spoonful of sugar that makes the medicine go down. It's understanding that not for everybody, but for most people most of the time, personal mortality topics are at least subconsciously aversive. So we want to think about how do we lead with topics that are not death-focused. In other words, in very simple terms, if you want a larger audience, don't lead with death. So what might that look like? Well, I'll share with you my experience. I started out just out of law school, working in plan giving for a small residential college, and I took over from my predecessor, who he would give estate planning seminars. This was a religiously affiliated college. He would give estate planning seminars in our supporting churches. And so I put together an estate planning seminar. And I have to admit to you, it was fantastic. And both of the people who showed up for it agreed that was a great seminar. So I had to learn that maybe we need to do this a different way. In that particular context, because of my law background, I actually started giving seminars on Christians and the law. And we talked about religious liberties issues and various other things in the news, but the last third of it we would talk about stewardship and estate planning issues. So another example, and I borrowed this from the person who did plan giving for a number of years in the Archdiocese of New Orleans. He had the same experience. Went in the churches, gave estate planning seminars, very well qualified attendance, but very little. So what he did was he started giving presentations on senior concerns, where he talked about health-related issues, finance-related issues, but also put in some estate planning, plan giving issues at the end as well, and saw, again, much larger audiences. You might give a seminar, for example, on tax-smart giving, talk about some current giving tips, but also some plan giving tips. You know, if you leave that IRA to your kids, they've got to pay taxes on it whenever they pull it out. Any of that you leave to charity, you completely avoid those income taxes, for example. Now, can you take this too far? Maybe so. One example that I pulled from the Journal of Gift Planning, it was effective, it worked, but it might be stretching it a little bit too far, where they would give a seminar on identity theft and then end it with, since you're thinking about ways to protect yourself and your identity, why not think about ways to protect your estate as well, and give an abbreviated estate planning seminar. Now that might be stretching it a bit too far, but it still worked for them, because if you want a larger audience, don't lead with that. Or this. This is oftentimes an issue with people who know fundraising, but they've not been in the plan giving space and they're a little bit freaked out. Conversation is something like this. Okay, so how does this work? I mean, do you want me to sit across the kitchen table from this lady and say, "You're looking a little old. You got all this stuff around here. You're not going to need this stuff when you're dead. We could use this stuff when you're dead." How do you do that? How do you have these conversations? Well, one of the best approaches that I like, and I borrowed this from Jeff Comfort at Oregon State University, I like to call this the Fluoresce Method. for 3 stories and then shut up. So how might this work? Suppose that I was a fundraiser for Texas Tech. I'm a professor there, but and you're an alum, and we're having a get-together, having a meeting. At some point, probably what's going to come up is, so what's new at Texas Tech? Well, we're really excited about our new basketball coach. We made it to the Elite 8 this year for the first time in history. We've got a good recruiting class coming in for the fall. Oh, we've got some new residence halls that have been finished. You can see those if you come in on the west side of campus, because over 40,000 students now, so really growing a lot, and exciting to see that construction. Oh, and Mary Smith did a neat thing. Now, did you know Mary? She graduated 2 years before you. No? Well, Mary spent her whole life helping other people get their finances in order, and she recently signed a new will that one day will create a permanent scholarship for our financial planning students. That's the 4th step. Now, if you have reached somebody at a point in their life when they are not interested in having this plan-giving conversation with you, what you will hear in response to this is, so that new building, where would I park if I wanted to see where that was? And you might think, oh, well, yeah, gave it a shot, but it didn't work. And you would be wrong. Here's why. We have tested message after message to see what works to change people's attitudes about their interest in making a gift and a will to a charity. And nothing compares, to this point, nothing is even close to the effect of sharing a living donor story. Sharing a story about somebody like me who has made this gift, especially when it's a gift that reflects their life story, because it starts making me think about my life story and how that gift, how I might make a gift that would reflect that. Sir?
You had a qualifier in a living donor story.
Yes.
It should be living, it can't be this person.
So we've tested both deceased donor stories and living donor stories, and the way we did this is they were absolutely identical stories. We just changed the wording as 7 different sets. Deceased donor stories are fine. It's better than like throwing stats at people or some other things, but it approximately doubled the impact if we made it a living donor story. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, donor stories work if they're people like me. So we're trying to establish a social norm. Social norm means people like me do things like this, okay? So a dead person's not like me because I'm not dead. Also, you get a little bit of this aversion to being like the dead person because of this avoidance response, and so we pull that out. And so use deceased donor stories if that's what you got, but if you can choose living donor stories. And if I'm one-on-one with a person and I've got my story, I know that donor, there's going to be some way in which they're similar to the person I'm talking to. Now, you know, I'm not going to point out the ways in which they're completely different, okay? I'm going to discuss some way or mention some way, oh, she graduated a couple of years before you, or whatever the case may be, that they have some similarity, so that I can create that idea that people like me do things like this. Or this, the Oblique focus group. I love this story. This was a charity, puts on a plan giving seminar. People don't show up, so they hire a consultant. And they say, consultant, what's going on? Consultant says, I don't know, let's have a focus group. So they bring some donors in, have some food, get them around the table and say, folks, we want to put on these plan giving seminars, nobody's showing up, and we want to tell people about, you know, things like charitable gift annuities and the ways they could, hand goes up in the back. What? Oh, a charitable gift annuity, that's where you make a gift to the organization, get back lifetime income, immediate tax deduction, avoid all capital gains taxes. And, oh, okay. You know, we even thought about getting a little kind of technical, maybe talking about charitable remainder trust, but maybe that's going too far. And what? Oh, a charitable remainder trust. That's where you set aside an asset. You can sell it with no capital gains tax, take income off of it for life. Whatever's left over at the end of life goes to the charity, but you get an immediate tax deduction. Oh, okay. So here was the result. The organization got planned gifts the next day from people who had been in the focus group. And the conclusion of the article was that the best way to teach people about planned giving was not having a planned giving seminar, but to have a focus group on why nobody will come to planned giving seminars. See, this is the idea that we're doing something else, and along the way we drop the death-related topic, rather than leading with the death-related topic. Or, of course, this. Think about how death insurance is sold. It's like fire insurance. It pays you if the event happens, right? But, okay, I know we don't call it death insurance. That's what it is. You know that's what it is. But we call it life insurance. But how is life insurance actually sold? Life insurance that has a human being selling it. It's actually sold in combination with lots of other financial products, what we might call whole life or universal life. And here's one of the reasons why. If I'm just selling you term, I got to start out with, hey, you're going to die. Let's talk about your death and that's all it is, right? But if I'm selling you a whole life or universal life product, I can start talking about your plans for your retirement, what do you want to save for, your kids' college education, and then along the way, now, if something happened to you, did you still want your kids to go to college or not? Oh, you do? Okay, well, let's go ahead and put this protection in along the way, because now I don't have to lead with the death-related topic. And that then leads to the power of what we're going to talk about today, which is using surveys, in particular in planned giving. Why are response rates so much higher? Let me give you an example. So one organization that I worked with, they took a very frontal approach to trying to get planned giving commitments. So they did a straight up appeal letter. I won't get into the details, but it very strongly led with death. They had the standard response card, and if you're not familiar with it, the standard response card has two options. One is, I've already included a gift to your organization in my will, and the other is, please contact me about my upcoming death. Well, we know that's what it means, right? So the organization got they sent out 35,000 of these appeal letters, and in response, they got back 0. Now, for those of you who don't have a PhD in economics and do statistical analysis, I'll translate that for you. That's not a very good response rate. Okay? Now, here's the critical thing, though. The same organization sent out a brief, one-page survey. Survey started out, questions about of the different programs we do, what's particularly important to you? How did you first get connected with the organization? Other things we want to know about our donors. And in the second half, it had the questions about if you would consider different types of gifts, including an estate gift, and also if you had already included us. It's the same question. Okay. They want the same information, exact same question, but when they sent it out in a survey, they got a 22% response rate. 22% response rate, answering the exact same question. What happens when we lead with the death question? Avoidance. Nothing. We get jacked back. What happens if we're doing other things and along the way, oh, here's the death-related topic, 22% response rate. Interestingly enough, the organization then a year later resent the survey to the non-responders and got a 19% response rate from them. So people just get busy and kids don't get it done. So when we're talking about surveys, one of the attractions of the surveys is that we don't lead with death. We don't telegraph death with the communication. We ask for input, opinions, and whatever death-related topics that we do, they appear in the second half of the survey. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some keys to building a survey and also some keys to using the survey. So keys to building a survey, I'm going to look at 4 different key areas. We'll spend time on each of those. One is, I should say, so I don't, I'm a professor, so I don't actually sell anything. So if you ever connect with me on LinkedIn, which is the best way to do it, or if you send me an email, I will send you links to every presentation I've ever done, every academic paper I've ever done. If you care about this topic, do that. It's like this message that's like, you may regret connecting with me on LinkedIn. I'm going to be like, here you go. including these slides and any other presentation slides that I have. So I just want to mention that. First issue, ask meaningful questions. Now, I know that we're going to get to the second half of the survey, and we're going to talk about how that can be useful. But before we jump into this, understand that this is a really powerful tool, that you can learn what people care about and what they're less interested in. You can learn about their life connections to the organization, how they first got, how long they've been connected to the organization. Do not ask these obviously biased questions so that everybody knows what answer you're looking for that sort of justifies why you exist as an organization. Don't do that, right? Be real. Collect real information, because I'll tell you what, I have heard from organizations, one organization in particular said, yeah, we were doing this came out from the Plan Giving office, we did this, it was great, got the Plan Giving related information that we wanted and accomplished various other things. But the big thing that came out of it is what our leadership thought was the reason why our donors was giving was not the reason why our donors were giving. There was this huge disconnect between the leadership and their sort of, this is what we're doing and everybody supports us because of this. No. It was something completely different. And the difference is not that, look, if you meet with enough donors, you're going to know that. But the difference is now all of a sudden, if you need to convince the higher ups, this isn't just the, well, I've been doing this for years and you just need to listen to me. That's, okay, it's, here's the data. This is what our donors are interested in. This is what they're not interested in. So don't shoot the messenger here, just telling you. So you've got some objective information that you can actually use to make your organization, in some cases, a little more donor-centric, because now you've got some hard data on what things donors care about and maybe what they don't care about as much. So I want to talk about the importance of emphasizing lasting impact. I mentioned that for most people, most of the time, first stage response to death reminders is avoidance. There is a second stage response that people also have. And that second stage response in the psychology literature is referred to as pursuit of symbolic immortality. You may think of it as lasting social impact. It's the idea that if I can't avoid the reality that I'm not going to be here forever, I start to focus more on what's going to be left behind after me. I get really attracted to things where some part of me, something reflecting my life story, my community and values, is going to live beyond me. That permanence becomes particularly attractive in this context. And we found that in surveys when we asked people about interest in making current gifts and estate gifts to different organizations, and we then asked them about how quickly they would like to see that money spent. They actually want more permanence for their estate gifts than for their current gifts by about a 2-to-1 margin. I'm going to share with you a piece of research that I think really drives this home. So let me give you, this was an experiment that had 4 different groups in it, and here's how it worked. Everybody was made aware that one of the people in the group was going to win, be randomly drawn to win $1,000 at the end of the experiment. Okay? Now, you have an opportunity to pre-commit part of that $1,000 to a charity. Okay? Now, this is real money because you can't change your mind if you end up being the winner and you've pre-committed however much that's going to go to that charity. Okay? In all 4 groups, in all 4 cases, the charity was always the same charity, a poverty relief charity. Now, the normal group was the group in the middle, and for that group, the poverty relief charity was either described as meeting the immediate needs of people or creating lasting improvements that would benefit people in the future. And for that normal group, the right message was meeting the immediate needs of people. Okay? That generated the highest gift. That's the message you want to go to. The other 2 groups, however, before they were asked the question about charitable giving, they went through an exercise to remind them of their own mortality. So it's a little bit like going through your own estate plan. Okay? They were focused on their own mortality. After that exercise, they are asked this question, and all of a sudden for the group that's focused on their own mortality, the right message reverses. Now, if you describe that charity as meeting the immediate needs of people, that does not work at all. But if you describe the charity as creating lasting improvements that would benefit people in the future, all of a sudden now that's the right message. Because when we get into an estate giving context, when we get into any context that reminds people of their own mortality, permanence becomes very attractive. Even if it's simply the way we describe the organization, as in this experiment, as one that benefits people in the future. So how do we emphasize lasting impact? Well, we can emphasize lasting impact in simply the words we use to describe what the organization does. So just as an example, suppose I was putting together a survey for Acme Environmental Charity, right? At some point, I want to ask about, have them give their ratings on how important they think a variety of these different projects or areas that we do work in are. So when I talk about one of the projects is purchasing sensitive lands to protect it, I'm going to instead ask about how important it is to purchase new sensitive land areas to protect them for future generations. I'm going to talk about permanently protecting and preserving sensitive forest areas, or perpetually conserving sensitive wetland areas, or the importance of educating younger generations about the importance of enduring environmental conservation. So because I'm getting ready to ask a end-of-life related question, I want to focus on permanence when I'm describing what the organization does. We did some tests to see which type of preliminary reminder questions increase willingness to give, in this case to environmental organizations. One of the sets of questions that worked well for both current giving intention and estate giving intention was to ask people what we call legacy questions. Please rate the importance of the following: being a good example for the next generation, making a lasting impact on the world, ensuring that your values will be remembered for future generations. We're getting ready to ask them about their interest in a gift and a will, so we're trying to push that focus a little bit more forward into the future. The next factor that's important to bring to mind, if at all possible, and this is a very effective strategy for gifts and wills, is to bring to mind the life story. That is, the person's life relationship with the cause, their self-identity. Now, some of my research at Texas Tech includes Neuro Imaging, where we actually put people in the brain scanner and we have them make charitable estate planning decisions. And one of the things we learned from those neuroimaging experiments, yes, we do that, in those neuroimaging experiments, is that when people are making decisions about giving money to charity in an estate plan, it specifically engages visualized autobiography brain regions. People are engaging in what we might call life review. Does this charity fit into my life story? They don't do that with just small dollar gifts or volunteering. This is only for charitable bequest gifts. Now, my colleague and co-author, Dr. Claire Ratley, she also wanted to find out what people think about when they, why they pick the charities they pick to be in their will. She did a really weird process, though. Instead of using a $3 million machine, she asked them. Qualitative researchers, I don't understand. But anyway, what she found from her series of interviews, and I won't read you her whole 400-page dissertation, but I'll give you her summary sentence, was that when discussing which charities they had chosen to remember, there was a clear link with the life narratives of many respondents, the life stories. Yes?
So as you've been talking about surveys, this may not be press for, but did you select a certain age cohort for these surveys?
So the question is, do you select a certain age cohort for these surveys? It depends on who you want to work with. Who do you want to spend time with? In this space, the critical decisions are made at an older age. So my tendency would be to do that, because that's who I want to get the information from. That's who I want to follow up with. That's who I want to know if they're in that consideration stage. Other organizations have different metrics.
So the surveys that you're referencing here,
Mhm.
I know they're all different.
Right.
Is it likely then that they actually did the 50 to 100 years? I mean, I'm trying to understand if the 5,000 that were surveyed range from millennials to.
I'm following you. I got lost with your question. Okay. So the question is, who are we asking these questions? Okay, so two things. For the most part, when we're doing surveys, this includes a wide range of ages, and so what we always do is we then say, okay, were any of these responses age dependent? Is this just a thing that's a human thing, or is it a thing that, well, it's kind of a 30s, 40s thing, but not a 60s, 70s thing? And so all of the results I'm going to share with you either, one, work for the older adults just as well as everybody else, or two, I'm going to show you both sets of results so you know when they're different. So the surveys do include broad audience, but we make sure that if it's different for older adults that we report that. Yes?
What age do you use for the term older adults?
So this gets me into a different topic, but it's a topic I love, and people won't let me talk about it because I hack people off when I talk about it. So you've asked, so I get to talk about it now. What we find from national longitudinal research, this is the largest study in the history, largest federal grant in the history of the University of Michigan was to fund this study. It's called the Health and Retirement Study. Been going on for 25 years. Nationally representative, in-person surveys of adults over the age of 50, and this is where I've spent many years of my life working with, because they ask a charitable estate planning question in the survey every 2 years. We know when people add in charity to the estate plan. We know when they take it out, and over 12,000 people in that study have died, and we know where all their stuff went. Okay, so we can connect that over a long period of time. So a couple things we know from that. One of the things we know is that the majority of charitable estate gifts that actually transfer dollars to charity at death, they were added within the last 5 years prior to death. It's a little scary. Now, it's great to get in the plan early because those gifts were bigger, but what we see is an enormous amount of end-of-life instability, charitable component being dropped, charitable component being pulled up. Because these plans change whenever death becomes real. I get a negative diagnosis of heart disease, cancer, stroke, my self-reported health goes down, or I have a change in family structure, which is, for example, widowhood, divorce, marriage, birth of the first child, birth of the first grandchild. And whenever that happens, people engage in new planning, and when they engage in new planning, they don't necessarily even remember that the old plan had a charitable component in it. And so we get all of this sort of instability. Another quick stat for you, from a national study of probate records in Australia, they looked at the age that the person was when they signed the will to see what percentage of charitable dollars were transferred by wills signed in the 80s, 90s, and older. 76% of charitable dollars transferred by wills signed in the 80s, 90s, and older. Okay? If you're interested in wills signed before age 70, that's great. That's 13% of the dollars. Now, what we know from the longitudinal study is not just that those wills are being made, but that they have big probability of changes in the charitable component. So there is a lot of end-of-life instability that takes place in this. We have now been able to track 10-year periods, year after year after year with the Health and Retirement Study. We can look at people who say, yes, I have a charitable component in my estate plan. And then 10 years later, we look at those, among those who are still answering the question, what percentage still say, yes, I have a charitable component in my estate plan? It's 55%, okay? It's 55% when we looked at the 10-year period going from 1994 to 2004. When we go from 1996 to 2006, 1998 to 2008. Every single time we look at this number, it's always about 55%. And even we've got our latest numbers from 2016. It's a 55% 10-year retention rate You don't want to hear that because it makes your life a mess. You want to count it and forget it so you can move on to the next person. I'm just telling you that's not how this works. And by the way, if you look at when should you expect to receive half of the dollars, at what age should you expect to receive half of the dollars from your donors? It's about age 89. That means you're going to get half of your dollars from people who are dying at 89, 90, and older. Why is that? 2 reasons. Wealthy people live longer, okay? Number 2, health and retirement study now shows us that not only do wealthy people live longer, but people who have a charitable component in their estate plan live longer than others of their same wealth category because they're connected, they're less isolated, lots of reasons why. But what it means is this, so it's where, I know everybody's really excited about the baby boom and they're coming and that's great and all of that. Actually, if you care about dollars coming in through bequests, you care about people. Right now, we are at the very, very bottom of the baby bust, okay? That's where we are for the ages that actually generate the dollars, okay? Everything's good from now on up, but right now, we are at the very bottom demographically because we care about people in their late 80s, early 90s. That's where the dollars actually come from. So, coming back to the question, what does older adult mean? For me, I'm not even interested in you until you're 75, right? You're not even on the radar. But that annoys people because look, here's the difference. You're used to hearing from people who want you to like them and who you can hire to do stuff, okay? I'm a professor. I'm not selling anything. And frankly, I've got tenure. So I don't really, whatever, right? If I tell you that you can just spend all your time working with people who are around your own age, and then once they commit, it's always going to be in the plan. You can count it and forget it. You can move on to the next one, and congratulations, you've helped get that billion-dollar funny money campaign with no, we can't actually spend it, and it's all revocable and all of that. That's a nice thing for me to tell you. It makes your life easier. This is why people won't let me talk about this topic, because it annoys them. Yes.
Okay, but to go with the statistic about people more likely than not to make a change in their estate plan at an older age, do you have some statistics that show the impact of actually being spoken to by a charity, worked with by a charity? Does that turn things around a bit?
Yeah, so we do not have data in that survey on that piece of information, but I can tell you what we can say confidently is that the notion that older adults become sort of cognitively fossilized and they don't ever change their mind on their estate plan, that is just not true, okay? So fundamentally, we have this high level of instability, especially in the last 3 to 5 years of life. And we also know that it is all about just being at the top of the mind at the point of decision. We've got results I think I'm going to share with you here in a moment that just asking the question during the estate planning process more than doubled the share of people who are including a gift in a will, okay, to a charity. Okay. So we know this is sort of a fluid kind of decision. So is being top of the mind absolutely critical? I think absolutely it is. There is no doubt about it. And when we look at organizations that get the lion's share of dollars in this space, it's one of 2 things. Either they just happen to represent a cause that's naturally in front of 80-year-olds, cancer, healthcare, pets, some veterans organizations, things like that, or they're intentional about going and seeing people. There are organizations who it is frankly just in their DNA to go see old people, okay? And they get the money. And now, I will tell you that the nice thing from a competitive perspective is not just that charities are a little off with this, it's that charities do this precisely the wrong way. Let me explain what I mean. When we looked at people who actually transferred dollars to charity at death, you go back 10 years before death, over 70% of them were donors. You go back in that critical decision-making stage, the last 3 years, 2 to 3 years of death, only about half are still donors. And you got charities that say, oh, well, we only communicate based on recency, so that means we're going to go completely radio silent right at the most critical point of decision, right? Yes, you got to stay connected. You got to be top of the mind. So thank you for allowing me to do that completely off-topic rant, because they wouldn't schedule me for it. Okay, so by the way, this idea that people are engaged in life review, that can go into the way that we phrase the question. This final phrase here, to support a cause that's been important in your life. That is the most powerful addition we've used when we're describing any kind of planned gift. If we add that to the description, it bumps up people's interest in making the gift. The Neuro Imaging says the more they engage in life review, the more likely they are to make a gift and a will to the charity. We're actually using a question that makes them engage in that life review by saying, do you want to make a gift to charity in your will to support causes that have been important in your life, or to support a cause that has been important in your life for a single organization. This is just the results to say that the living bequest donor stories, and I say the word bequest because I'm not trying to raise money from you. You've already seen that this technical word doesn't actually work as well as gift and a will, but that that the living donor stories are very effective. So life stories. What are some things that initially connected you with this organization? When did this cause first become important in your life? We tested this. The life questions that we put up here in our experiment were the most powerful set of questions at increasing the interest in making a gift and a will, because we asked them that at the end of the survey. So including this, when did you get connected, was very important. Life stories and family connections. One of the things that came out of the qualitative research was that when people were answering the question, why did you pick the charities you picked to be in your will, they often described gifts that were to a charity, but they were actually for a loved one. They were what we might call tribute gifts as well. So we took that into the brain scanner. The first set of experiments, we learned that bequests to friends and family more heavily involve brain regions of emotion and memory than do charitable bequests. No surprise there. But then we learned that if, after they've answered that charitable bequest question, if we ask them about, do you have a family member who would have appreciated your support of this cause? If they had a family member connection to the cause, and then we asked the bequest question again, the only difference was this time we asked about making a gift in a will in honor of a family member. That tribute bequest concept, not only, if they had a family member connection, not only way bumped up their interest in making this kind of a gift, but in the brain scanner, we saw that now the decision involved a lot of this memory and emotion. Whereas the first time we just asked the question, there wasn't much memory and emotion there. And then we found it experimentally in a large survey that it bumps up the interest as well. So life stories and family connections. You can ask about family connections. But here's the thing. If you ask about, because we did this in an experiment once and it didn't work because we did it wrong. You can't just ask about the family connections if you don't also ask about a tribute gift in a will, a gift in honor of a family member in a will, because you're not resolving the tension between family and charity without doing that. Does this kind of tribute gift work better or worse for different family members? Yes, it does. People want to do tribute gifts in honor of ascendants, not descendants. These are in order, so it's female ascendants are actually stronger than male ascendants in terms of people's interest in leaving that gift. Yes, I will note there is no number 7. Father was statistically insignificant. I'm sorry about that. I have 2 teenage daughters. They often find my comments to be statistically insignificant. Those things are related. We also want to use the best phrases when we're describing these kinds of gifts. As I mentioned, this was a study in the UK, 3,000 people going through their normal estate planning process. Just asking the question doubled the share of people who are including charity in a will. But if you ask it with the social norm statement, many of our customers like to leave money to charity in their will. Now we're more than tripling, and we actually increased the average gift size by 100%. So it's a 6-fold effect. We tested this in the U.S. It has the same effect in the U.S. If you have a social norm statement, it bumps up people's interest. Many people like to leave a gift to our organization in their will. By the way, you have to say the word like too. It's not nearly as powerful if you just say people do this. You got to say they like to do it. So you can do that in the way that we phrase now. We're getting to the punchline. What's your interest in making the gift? Many people like to support this important cause in the following ways, which you already used with this organization. Gift of cash or check, gift of credit card, gift in your will, tribute gift in your will. Notice what we're doing. Even in the punchline question, we're not leading with debt. So what ways have you supported? You know, like, oh yeah, gift of cash or check, or include a gift in your will, or this, right? We're just asking the death-related question, but we're hiding it among other things. Oh, by the way, what this survey can do, you can find out people that are, already have, or let me switch to this one. Please rate the likelihood that you might consider any of the following giving options within the next 6 months. Okay, again, cash, credit card, gift in a will. Very soft sort of question, attitudinal sort of question. Find out who has interest. But you also get to find out who's thinking about maybe making a gift of stocks or real estate in the next 6 months. Would you maybe want to know that? Yeah, absolutely. So you can collect lots of useful information along the way, so it not only serves the function of sort of hiding the death-related question, but you get really powerful information. And along the way, you know what I'm doing? I'm actually educating people. Because if they are answering a question, how likely would it be that you would honor a family member by making a tribute gift to the organization in your will? A what? Huh, that's interesting. We found in a survey just asking that question by itself, just asking that question bumped up interest in making a gift in a will to a charity for 1 out of 4 people. So not a universal solution, but just educating them. And so that's part of the process as well. So how do we use the survey? Few minutes to talk about some ways of using a brief survey such as this. Level 1, what happens if you don't do anything? If you just send it out and then ignore everything that comes back in. You would say, oh, well that's a disaster. Actually, it's not. You've actually created a step-by-step process that shifts people's attitudes about making a gift in a will. We know this because we tested experimentally. If you ask them these questions first, if you ask them about their lifetime connections with the organization, if you go through this process and then ask you at the end of that process, they are more interested in making a gift in a will than they were at the beginning. So you get a little bit of attitude shifting that takes place, and that can be a positive thing if they happen to engage in planning. Also, you're actually educating by asking the questions. Right? If you want to let people know that there are such things as a gift that pays you income for life, if, for example, you do gift annuities, right? Asking them their question about the interest in that with one checkbox of I'm not familiar with it, that is opportunity to educate. And of course, you get hand raises for the Legacy Society because you get a much higher response rate on a survey that asks people, hey, is this something you've already done? So that if that is one of your organizational metrics, there's absolutely nothing you can do that will drive the metric more than this. I mean, this is almost cheating, by the way, which is one of the reasons why there are other metrics that might be more effective. But hey, if that's your metric, you want to increase it, that will work. Level 2 results. Those are results if you're actually able to follow up. Now, if you want to follow up with people who are interested, do not send 10,000 surveys out, okay? Because your follow-up's going to be garbage. You know, send out a few. See what your response rate is. You know, is it 20%? Is it 15%? Is it 8%? Let's see what it is. And then you can sort of reverse engineer how many interested donors do I want to work with this next month, okay? Send out this many, I'll get this many back, then I can start working with them. Obviously, prospect identification. Not just will plans, but other planned and major gift opportunities. They're expressing they have interest in that. Those who have immediate interest, I would definitely include you guys in a will. Haven't done it yet, but if I happen to sign a new one, I definitely include you in a will. We want to know who that person is. Might want to talk with them. Again, only use small mailings so that you can follow up in a timely and appropriate way. You can also quantify your opportunities with those who are at different levels in the organizational chain. So for example, you can say, hey, we sent out this survey. By the way, we typically get this many dollars a year from estate gifts. Now it turns out that, of course, we only get estate gifts from people who actually have included us in their will. The survey says that's about 5% of our donors, okay? It turns out we've got another 33% of donors who said they definitely would do that, but they haven't. So that's kind of a really cool, and that number will always be much higher than your percentage who've actually done it. Just to quantify, hey, here's the unharvested field, so to speak. Here's people who are saying, yeah, I do that, but if we don't follow up with them, we know that, look, majority of adults over age 55, they don't have any will or trust documents. People just keep putting it off, right? So there's the opportunity that we can quantify a little bit. Wouldn't it be nice to double or triple our estate gift income? It's right there. People are saying, yeah, I'd do that. They're just not doing it. So it takes a little bit of hand-holding. And then, of course, at a certain age, in particular, if we don't take care of it now, then the opportunity's gone. The reality is a little over 90% of substantial donors die with no gifts in their estate plan. So very common, and if you do nothing, we know it's going to happen. And again, pulling that from the Health and Retirement Study, people that are substantial lifetime givers, fewer than 10% are actually going to transfer anything to charity when they pass away. The third level is, this is where I get my sort of research wonkiness that I really like this stuff. You can do some cool things if you're sending out these surveys in small segments. One of the things you could choose to do is you could start to think about what's the right language of your particular plan giving ask. I shared with you just a few tips on things we've tested that bump up people's interest in making these kinds of gifts, but you have your own survey and you're asking people about their attitudes about, how, if you happen to complete a will in the next 3 months, a new will, what's the likelihood you might include a gift to our organization? You can start thinking about what works for you. How do you want to phrase that question? How do you want to lead up to that question? Let's take half of them and let's do a lead up this way, and the other half, and let's do the lead up that way, and let's see, does that make a difference? You can learn a little bit about what messages work for your organization. The other thing you can do if you're not changing the surveys is you can actually measure progress on attitudes. Now this is a real problem when it comes to this planned giving space with estate gifts, because look, you can do it wrong for 20 years and not know you're doing it wrong, because we got a really long kind of time frame here between when we do the action and when the dollars come in the door. Now, as you work with an older and older audience, that time frame gets shorter, but in particular, if you're not working with an older audience, you don't get immediate feedback. So that's why people can be all over the map when it comes to this area of fundraising, because unlike, say, direct mail, if something blows up, you know it right away. That didn't work. 35,000 went out, got nothing back. That didn't work. Let's do something different, right? We don't get that as often in this space. But we can actually use this as a way to track attitude. You're asking an attitudinal question about if you happen to complete a will in the next, say, 6 months, what's the likelihood you might include a gift to our organization? Got standard kind of Likert scale of, definitely, think about it, definitely not. You can see over time, all right, we did this mailing, we did this other communication effort, we sent out these postcards. Did it move the needle? Did it change people's attitudes? Well, if you're sending these out every month, every quarter, you're actually getting back that data. And of course, it'll bounce. But over time, is it sort of bouncing higher? Is it bouncing lower? Well, what's happening to people's attitudes in this space? We can actually measure attitudes right away. And we can see, are we changing our typical donors' attitudes towards these kinds of gifts? Yeah.
When it comes to doing a survey to get this information, how often would you send that
people just once? Or is that what you're saying, to send to some of the same people?
Well, no, so this would not be sending to the same people. This would be that we're doing small samples,
I
but
get that, but I get that.
right. So the question of how often would you then go back rather than, so I'm thinking here, maybe like max 10% of your donor group, in which case then if you're adding in new donors, you can probably go, if you're doing quarterly surveys, you can probably go almost 3 years before you run out of people. 3 years later, is it appropriate to send a survey? If it was me, I would build a survey with a little different theme for the second time around. But if you're surveying, say quarterly, 10% of your people, you can go almost 3 years before you have to resurvey the same actual group. And then I would have it have a different theme. It's still going to include my core questions that I care about at the end, but it may be focused on a different topic. Yeah.
And the logistics of this, are you sending these hard copy with a self-addressed stamped return envelope?
So there's different ways to do it. Some people like for example, just the internet, online. Okay. Now that's great because it's super cheap, super fast, but you're going to reach a smaller share of your audience. For example, I think Greg Warner at Market Smart and likes to do that. There's other groups that like to do just mail surveys. Gabriel Group in Kansas City does just mail surveys. There's other groups. I'm sure the consultants here could do a mix of both. For an older audience, if that's your target, and I think it should be, you're going to get a relatively higher response rate from the direct mail as compared to younger groups. But it's still, direct mail is still more expensive than sending out, doing an email thing. Yeah.
And so to follow up on that, if you were advising an organization who sent quarterly marketing cards that are the basic, the story and the return thing, would you scrap that and move to this?
No, because the way I think it would be great to see this used is not to do it as a whole donor base kind of mailing. Yeah, I would do it segmented so that you can actually follow up with the people. Because, response rate, that's fantastic. But if you actually got to follow up with people, you got to be a little careful on how many you're sending it out to. Now look, if I'm coming in and I'm just going to be there for 12 months and I want to show everybody what a genius I am and I'm going to hit metrics on hand raises for Legacy Society, fine, send it out to all of them, right? And I'll get a bunch of hand raises for Legacy Society. I didn't actually raise any of that money, but it's your crediting system, so whatever, here you go, here's hand raises. I think you want to use them in small batches so that you can actually do follow-up. There's one organization that does this really extensive, they actually do like an 18-page long survey, that they mail out to people. And then what they'll do is they'll follow up with the people by saying, hey, I really appreciate that you took the time to fill this out. I know this was not a quick thing for you. I want to let you know that we've actually got all of our results back from our survey, and I wanted to stop by and just share our report with you on what some other people thought about that. Now, again, they're using that as an excuse for an in-person visit, and clearly I'm going to use that with people who their survey has identified them, and then you try to continue those conversations. Yes, sir?
And you just kind of hit on a little bit of what I was going to ask. Structure of the survey.
Yeah.
Is there a number of questions that's kind of a target you should be asking?
Yeah.
Your example has this is a
One
one-page
page.
survey.
Yeah.
Does that work best? Then you've got the various themes broken out into
Yeah.
sections within those pages.
Right, so I'm showing you how you can do it in a one-page version. The question of, does the 18-pager work better? I don't know. I haven't actually tested. I know some places are doing that. In general, you would think as you get more burdensome, you get lower response rate. But maybe if that works for that group and they get those really committed people and so I actually haven't tested that. So I don't know what the ideal space is, but I do know the group that got the 22% response rate, they were using a hard copy mail one-page survey. Well, I hope some of that's been of interest to you. Thank you so much.
very much. Here's a appreciation gift from our group. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Everyone, these evaluations are very important. This section is at the top of page 3. So if you would kindly fill that out again before you leave the building today. Lunch is in the big room. If you